Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to do this portrait and talk about how to draw white beard and white hair. As for the subject of my portrait, you may remember Proximo from the movie Gladiator, and he was played by Oliver Reed, a great classic actor, and I thought that he would make a great subject for my portrait. So let's have a look. So I already have a simple sketch with a graphite pencil, but I'm gonna go over some of these lines with a black colored pencil to reinforce them a little bit, to give myself a better idea where these white lines and white hairs are gonna be. I'm gonna use a technique which I've already used in some of my previous drawings, and I'm gonna be using a pointed stick to create some indentations and going over them with a pencil, and hopefully the white lines will show up. I've done that in the Ragnar video and also the Russell Crowe video. And now in the Russell Crowe video, which is very popular, I didn't show the whole process. That's why I wanted to take you through the whole process this time, so it would be good if you were to watch the entire portrait. So now I'm going to use this a simple pointed stick, and I'm just going to be making some indentations. I'm going to use this small piece of paper to do a simple demonstration of my technique. I just use a pointed stick to create some indentations in the paper. I just create these invisible lines which will become visible soon enough when I go over them with charcoal. And then once you do that, you can go over that with a Tutillion or a brush, maybe to push a little bit of charcoal into those lines, into those creases, and then you can clean up some of them to bring back those highlights and make them lighter using your erasers, whether you're using a pencil eraser or a kneaded eraser, or you can use an eraser to maybe try to add a little more volume and density to that hair, so you can make these white areas even bigger, so that you have more of that white hair. You can do that as well. And also another thing you can do is go back in with a pencil and go in between these areas, maybe add a little bit more of these darker areas of darker value to try to create a little more depth. So it's a little bit more complicated than just using a pointed stick, but obviously you need to refine it a little bit. So this process is going to require a little bit of patience, because I'm going to be going over all of this area where the hair is and the beard also. Now on the hair I will make fewer of these indentations because I want the hair to have fewer of these highlights, and I generally want the hair to be a little bit darker, more grayish, and the beard is going to be a little bit lighter, almost white, with these highlights and hairs a little bit more defined. As for my reference photo, you can have a look at that in the top left corner. And that was the photo I picked. I really liked his grim expression here, but like I said, Oliver Reed makes a great subject for a portrait, especially in this role of Proximo. That was a great role and a great movie as well. I suggest that you watch it if you haven't already. And sadly it was his last role, because he passed away just before the movie was done. They even had to do a little bit of CGI, I think, to be able to finish the movie with him in the role of Proximo. And now I'm working on his hat and adding a simple pattern there. I'm not going to bother too much putting in too much detail into it. I'm mostly interested in the hair and the face, so I'm going to be moving on to that. So I'm not going to spend too much time working on the head. I'm mostly interested in this hair now, and you can see that I'm putting in some darker areas of darker value in it using a combination of a charcoal pencil and some vine charcoal and even a black colored pencil. And you can see that some of these white lines are showing up as a result of the indentations that I created, but I will later work on it a little bit more because I need to shade the forehead first so that the white hair would stand out a little bit better. I also decided to use a black colored pencil to work a little bit on the facial features, and now I'm working on the eyes. And as you can see, I've done the left eye, and in order for this highlight to stand out, or this reflection in the eye to stand out, I have to shade all of the eye, including the eyeball. He has a nice looking scar here to the left, or on his right side of the face, and also on the nose and a little bit on the forehead as well. So an interesting face to draw with a lot of wrinkles and scars. So like I said, I am here drawing a whole portrait, and if you're only interested in drawing white beard and hair, then you can, I guess, skip to those parts, even though I like to be all over the place when I'm drawing, so I'm going to be working a little bit on the hair, then going back to the face, and vice versa. That's how I work. So now I'm mostly trying to finish the forehead and shade it and put some texture in there so that I can finish this here. Also, the eyebrows were a little bit challenging because they're also grayish, but you can barely tell that they're there. But they're kind of bushy and his eyes are deep set, so I need to shade everything below them a little bit darker. He also has fairly prominent cheekbones, and this scar is adding even more to the expressiveness of his face. Also quite a few wrinkles around the eyes. So you can see how nicely these small hairs around the left side of his face, or his right, are starting to stand out around his cheek, just below that scar, because I created some very nice small indentations there. Another thing I forgot to mention while I was demonstrating my technique is that obviously you need to vary the direction and the shape of those indentations so that the hair would look as organic as possible. And also, if you want the hair to look really thick and white, you need to create more of these indentations. But I did that for the beard, but for his hair I created fewer of them, because like I said, I want just a few flyaway hairs here and there, but I want it to appear mostly grayish. For the beard and the mustache especially, I want a little bit lighter hair and a little bit more contrast. That's why I created more indentations there and spent a little more time working on that. So I'm hoping that it would show up eventually once I go over it. Now, in case you're wondering what kind of pencils I'm using, and I know that some people will ask, it doesn't really matter, because normally I use a combination. I use mixed media. So normally I use a combination of charcoal and some other stuff like graphite pencils or a black colored pencil. But here it doesn't really matter, because you can do the same thing with graphite, you can do the same thing with colored pencils or with charcoal. It doesn't matter if you're using just one type of media or mixed media, it should have the same effect. So I simplified his robe a little bit on the left, and I just shaded it dark enough so that the beard would stand out. And what I'm doing now is I'm going in between some of these hairs and putting in some areas of darker value, so that I can perhaps add a little more depth to this beard. Now you have to be careful with this, because you shouldn't draw around the hairs, because that'll totally spoil its appearance. But just going in with a few darker spots, darker dots here and there, will make it look good. It'll give it a lot of depth, so you have to use it very sparingly. But it does create a nice looking effect. And I'm going to do the same thing around these bangs here, because I want them to be a little more defined, in contrast to the forehead and the face. And I also want to make it clear where the side of the face ends and where the sideburns and the beard begins. That's why I need these areas of darker value, because I need to separate these things. But you can see that now the hair is getting more structure and more depth, and it's starting to look more realistic. Now I'm working a little bit more on the hair on the top of his head. And I'm also putting in a little more shading on the face. I want some highlights on those cheekbones and around the eyebrows. And now I'm going to be moving on to the other eye. Again, I'm doing this with a black colored pencil because I need more precision, and this highlight in the eye is very, very small. And by the way, in my reference photo, the highlight was exactly in the middle. It was covering much of the pupil, so I decided to move it a little bit to the side, which is something that I often do when I draw portraits. I like to move the reflection just a little bit to one side. Now I'm going to be moving on to the mustache, and I need to make this area under the nose, because there is some shadow there. I need to make that area a little bit darker. And also obviously this area around the mouth and the lips, especially the lower lip, where there is no white hair, that needs to be darker as well. But then again, I didn't create any indentations there anyway. So you can see how I'm going over these mustache very lightly, and still these white hairs will start to show up. Now, when I said that this is a fairly simple technique, it is, even though there will be some people who will try it and say that they couldn't achieve the same effect. Well, I keep stressing that it's not enough just to create those indentations and go over them with a pencil. You need to do a lot more work in addition to that to give that beard a little more shape and depth. And you need to understand that the face and the head is a 3D object, and the beard is a part of it, so it's going to have its lighter sides and or shadow sides and lighter sides, and you need to shade accordingly. So some parts of that beard will simply be a little bit darker, and if you leave everything white, it will end up looking kind of flat. So you need to keep all of these things in mind. And one of the ways to make everything a little bit darker and to push a little bit of the charcoal or graphite, whatever it is that you're using, into those creases is to use a brush, because a brush, especially a stiff bristle brush, will push the charcoal into those creases, and it will add a little more value there. That's why that's what I did under his nose, because I want that part to be a little bit darker because of the shadow. And now shading the nose. First I'm going to cover everything a little bit, and then I'm going to pull some highlights on top of the nose. And I'm also doing a little bit more texture and a little bit more shading around the other eye as well. So like I said, as you can see, I started working on the mustache and the beard, and then I went back to shading the face. That's why you can't really skip over to the part where I'm doing the beard, because I like to be all over the place. I start with one area and then move on to the other. And I explained in one of my previous videos that the main reason why I do that is because I like to give myself a better idea about how much value I need in different areas of the portrait. And if I shade all over the portrait a little bit all at once, that kind of makes it easier for me to gauge how much lighter or darker I need to make certain parts of the face. Anyway, moving on to the hair on the other side. Again, I'm gonna do some flyaway hairs all the way on the edge, and then add a little more value in between those hairs, and then clean up some of these highlights so that they stand out. So as I started talking, this technique, even though it makes things simpler, obviously it does need a little bit of practice and experience. That's just the way it is with any other technique, with any type of drawing. And it certainly is a lot easier than doing all of this with just an eraser. If you try to do it with an eraser, you would run into a whole bunch of problems. First, getting those clean edges would be a lot more difficult. When you create these creases or indentations, it's a lot easier to get cleaner edges. And hairs, individual hairs, which are a lot better defined, which stand out with a lot more contrast. But with an eraser, all of these lines would be a little bit softer. It would be a little bit difficult to get clean edges and get more contrast. If you try doing that with a kneaded eraser, you would need a lot more time, and you would literally need to reshape your eraser probably thousands of times in order to draw a beard like that. And trust me, I should know, because I did that with my drawing, graphite pencil drawing of Gandalf, who has a much longer beard than this, but I think you get the idea that I needed to do a lot of work with a kneaded eraser. And if you tried working with a pencil eraser or even a Tombow Mono Zero eraser, you would have to keep cutting off the tip in order to be able to create a clean edge, because the tip of the eraser would be getting dirty all the time. So I'm shading here as well in order to separate the face from those hairs, and again pushing a little bit more charcoal into the indentations to make the hair on the sides of the face or on the sides of the cheeks a little bit darker. But the portrait is coming along nicely, and the face is mostly looking okay, but I just need to work a little bit more on the beard. And the lower part of the beard is kind of sticking out a little bit more. That's why I need to shade the area around the mouth or under the mouth a little bit more to make it a little bit darker, so that the lower portion of the beard would stick out a little bit more. But it's going to be fairly simple from here, because I created so many of these lines and they are so dense that I probably won't need to do much work other than just shade it a little bit, and that will probably be it. You can see how nicely these hairs are starting to stand out. I pretty much don't need to do any additional work here. I'm just shading over them and they are starting to stand out, which is what I wanted. That was the whole plan from the beginning. I don't know how much people use this technique. I like to use it a lot. There are some alternatives. One of them, like I said, is erasing, which can be a little tricky and requires a lot more patience. The other way to do it probably is to use a combination of white and black charcoal, but for some reason I don't really like using either white chalk or white charcoal for drawing hairs and highlights. I just don't really like the way it looks, and I always feel like reserving the white space or erasing creates a lot better effect when you're drawing highlights or lighter areas. The only thing that I really use white charcoal for is to help me with blending. Other than that, I don't like to use it for highlights. And whenever you tilt the drawing, when you created a highlight with white charcoal, the highlights won't look white, they won't look whiter than the rest of the area. So I guess I want the drawing that'll look good from different angles, I guess. So again, here I'm putting in a little bit more of these smaller, darker areas in between those hairs, just to add a little more depth, make the beard a little more interesting. I'm also going to do a little bit of shading here on the neck and the shirt, even though, like I said, I am simplifying the clothes, which is one of the things that I really like doing. I like omitting a lot of details, or simplifying things and creating vignettes. This is again another vignette because the lower portion of it is fading towards the edge. That's what I like to do, to be able to focus on the portrait and to allow the viewer to focus on the portrait as well, to focus on the face. And by the way, speaking of Oliver Reed, my favorite movie or movies of his were The Three Musketeers and The Four Musketeers, I think. That was the older version. That was a very good movie. And I haven't seen it in quite some time. I plan to see it again, even though I watched it a few times. That was made probably back in the 80s or maybe even 70s. I don't quite remember, but these are older movies. So I'm just going over some of these highlights with a pencil eraser, cleaning up some of them so that these white hairs would stand out a little bit more, and maybe adding a few of them around the edges so that we have a few flyaway hairs here and there, and just putting down some finishing touches on the face and the beard. I think I'm going to do another drawing as a demonstration on drawing white beards, and I'm not going to tell you which character I have planned. I'm going to keep it as a small surprise for later. But here I'm just adding a few final touches and the drawing is mostly done. I removed the tape here and the drawing was sprayed with a fixative spray. And now I'm just going to sign it. So I hope you like this portrait and the beard that I created. Thank you for watching, and make sure you check out my other videos. Bye for now.